Hey there, I'm Reverend Jim Keat, and this is the whole Bible. It's the series where we go through the entire Bible from beginning to end. We started in Genesis 1, and today we are at Genesis chapters 6 through 9. Now, this is where it gets, well, it's already been exciting. It continues to be exciting because these chapters, well, they're often called the Great Flood. That's a general title you could give to this one, and that's a good title. That's a good title. So you might know where this is going. But there's some other titles you could give to it too. You could call it the worst children's bedtime story ever. Think about it. Think what this story is. Genesis 6 through 9. It's Noah. You know the story. We're going to get into it. But let's just keep easing in. It's the worst children's bedtime story ever. Can you imagine why? Can you connect the dots here? I'll connect them for you in a minute. You could also call this chapter Divine Genocide. Are you figuring out what's going on here? This is an interesting story. Now, the other thing to think about is... remember, Genesis, we've said it the past couple of videos, is myth and legend. The first 10 chapters are myth. We're in chapters 6 through 9. And then we get into legend. That means none of it is history. So this story of the Great Flood, this great story of the worst children's bedtime story of divine genocide, of Noah and the ark, is not history. Doesn't mean there's nothing true about it, but we have to recognize the mythic nature of it. Let's start here. You just tell me who I'm talking about. This is a story about a man who is warned by God to build a large boat to survive a coming flood that's meant to wipe out humanity. Is that a good summary of the story? You know the story, right? What's the story? Come on, this is Blue's Clues again. What's the story I just described? Utnapishtim! How many of you said Noah? Utnapishtim? Who is that? Utnapishtim is a character from the Epic of Gilgamesh who gets this word to build a boat because there's going to be a big flood that's going to take out all humanity. Does that sound familiar? Now, unless there's just Noah's cousin we didn't hear about, this is just one more reminder that these ancient cultures and civilizations and societies, their stories and myths and legends blurred and merged and meshed together. So wait, who you call Utnapishtim, I might call Noah. What you call the Epic of Gilgamesh, I might call Genesis 6 through 9. That's where we're going here. That's just a helpful frame to remember that this Bible contains multitudes beyond just the words on the page. It has a history all of itself. And this story here is exactly that. Now, these chapters are fascinating, as the Bible tends to be. So let's talk about what these 3 chapters are. Chapter 6, Chapter 7, Chapter 8, and Chapter 9. Here's how I would describe Chapter 6. I'd call this corruption and calling. This is where humanity's violence grieves God, leading to the decision to cleanse the earth. Yet Noah is chosen as a sign of hope and faithfulness amid this widespread injustice. So we've just come out of, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. We had those 10 generations listed. We had Enoch and Methuselah in there. And now we get this moment with Noah. So humans, there's a lot of them suddenly, and they are not the greatest, apparently. Sounds familiar. We have a tendency to be horrible sometimes, a lot of times. And that corruption is here. It's in the midst of that corruption that God calls Noah. That's the story here of a sign of hope in the midst of all this chaos. That's chapter 6, so it kind of sets the stage for this story. Chapter 7, I would call Waters of Unmaking. Waters of Unmaking. That's a specific phrase. We'll come back to the Genesis 1 allusion in a second here. But this is the story where the floodwaters rise. So you got the boat built, you got the animals in it. And by the way, the animals came, we say 2 by 2, but some came 7 by 7. Read that in the text. There's 2 by 2 and 7 by 7, which might be an indication that this is 2 stories merged together. Lots going on there. Okay, chapter 7, Waters of Unmasking. The floodwaters rise, uncreating the world back into chaos. Oh, have you thought about it that way? This is not just a story about a thunderstorm. This is the uncreation of the world, back to the tohu vavohu, the formless and void, the spirit hovering over those chaotic waters that we saw in Genesis 1. So the floodwaters rise. We got chaos happening while Noah and his family and the animals are sheltered in the ark, and life is preserved through this devastation. You could almost say that this is another creation story, because we have these chaotic waters of uncreation, and then we have this spirit hovering over, the boat floating, the ark, this container, this giant, massive structure. We have this presence of God in the midst of chaos. Chapter 8, renewal and remembrance. All right, this is where God remembers Noah. the waters recede, creation begins again. The uncreation in that waters of unmaking, and now creation begins. An act of divine mercy that transforms judgment into the possibility of new beginnings. This is incredible stuff. This is the story. Yeah, we've heard it before, but there's nuances here that don't quite make it into the children's version of this story. Which, again, why is this a children's story? A story about God killing all the people and animals? I always find it ironic if this is painted on a kid's wall or in a Sunday school wing or any children's Bible that has smiling Noah and animals. And what about the not so smiling parts? All right. So God remembers Noah, and now we get to chapter 9, covenant and consequence. Covenant and consequence. God establishes a universal covenant with all creation. We're going to get covenants all throughout Genesis. Abraham really kicks that off in a couple chapters here, and then all of his kids really get the covenant thing going. But this is where we have a universal covenant with all creation, promising never again to destroy the earth by flood. And God sets this rainbow as a sign of God's faithfulness. Now, some people say the rainbow, I think this is true. Fact check it for me in real time, would you? The rainbow, this idea that God is hanging up God's bow, a weapon, bow and arrow kind of a thing. So God hangs God's bow in the sky as a symbol of peace and of a promise to never do this kind of destruction again. Isn't that incredible? Okay, but there's the consequence side of this. Even in the midst of God's covenant, human frailty soon reemerges right here in Noah's story. It reveals that renewal requires ongoing moral growth and communal care. What this really comes down to is the part of the story where Noah's 3 sons get drunk. Well, Noah plants a vineyard, gets drunk. His 3 sons see him naked. Well, one of them does and is like, "Dad's naked. Let's go laugh at him." The other's like, "No, we have to back in backwards and cover his nakedness or we'll be shamed." Chapter 9, go read it. It's the part of Noah's Ark that I bet your Sunday school teachers left out. It definitely didn't make it into the flannel graph. That'd be a rated R flannel graph with Noah's naked butt. Maybe rated PG-13, I guess. So there it is, Genesis 6 through 9. There's a lot going on. This, as always, is filled with more than the typical gloss over, sprint and you'll miss it, flannel graph version, but there's a lot of nuance. And even this just dipped our toes into these floodwaters. We're gonna keep splashing around. I'm just gonna use the water puns today. We're gonna keep splashing around in these chapters with 4 chapters from Bible in a Minute, videos within a video. So you're gonna hear from Reverend Joseph Yu on chapter 6. You're gonna hear Reverend Amanda Meisenheimer on chapter 7. You're gonna hear Reverend Ashley Dargai on chapter 8, and then you'll hear Reverend me on chapter 9. So let's give a listen, and then we'll come back with some questions.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 6. In this chapter, God witnesses the depravity and wickedness of humanity, and he finds a righteous person in Noah and tells Noah to build an ark. And while this chapter is full of questions and is a bit problematic, the Genesis writer says that the actions of humanity grieved God to his heart, meaning that this God has a heart, and a heart that is broken. And the thing about a broken heart is that a broken heart is a result of love. And so this God not only grieves, but this God is vulnerable. So I want to say to you is that it's okay to grieve. It's okay to hurt. It's okay to struggle. It's okay to be vulnerable, because when we are doing these things, we're not becoming ungodlike. We're embodying the love that God has, and we are now even worshiping God.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 7. Content warning. Mass killing. God tells Noah, "You alone are righteous. Take your family, 2 of every kind of wild animal and 7 of every clean animal, and enter the ark." And God shuts them in. Noah is 600 years old. Rain begins to pour from the sky. Water begins to erupt from the ground. And it rains for 40 days and 40 nights. And everything on dry land, in whose nostrils is the breath of life, dies. Everything on dry land, in whose nostrils is the breath of life, dies.
This is Bible in a Minute, Genesis 8. So Noah and his family and his menagerie won't be on the boat forever. God has remembered every living being on the ark and has made the waters subside. So Noah sends out a dove a couple of times for confirmation that there is indeed dry land. And after a little while, it's confirmed and they disembark. So Noah builds an altar, gives an offering, and God promises to never destroy every living being again. And if you remember of why they were put on the ark in the first place, the fact that humanity was wicked, it's interesting that humanity hasn't changed, but God's relationship to creation has somehow changed. There's a tension and a nuance. It's kind of like how clear the air is after a thunderstorm. And the importance is not the historicity of this story, but the highlighting that God's relationship with humanity and creation is interdependent. And just as importantly, humans' relationship with God directly affects creation. So that how we love God is how we love the earth. How we love the earth is how we love God, which is a pretty poignant word for today in the age of climate change.
Bible in a Minute, Genesis chapter 9. God tells Noah and his kids to make babies, care for the earth. God hangs up God's bow and promises to never again destroy the earth. Phew. And then Noah plants a vineyard, makes some wine, drinks a bit too much, and one of his kids laughs at his naked body.
Wait, what?
This is the end to Noah's story. And while we're typically familiar with the story of Noah building a boat, your Sunday school teacher probably didn't tell you the part where Noah gets drunk. But yep, that's in the Bible too. And it makes me wonder, what led Noah to drink so much? Was he reflecting on his year living on a boat while the world around him died? Was he depressed at the thought of a God who would haphazardly hit the divine reset button, ending the lives of nearly every living creature? Was the rainbow, as beautiful as it might be, far from adequate in exchange for the rot and decay left by the receding waters? Is this Noah deconstructing his faith? The God he thought was good and loving, revealed to be something else? All right, welcome back. You made it through 4 minutes of the Bible and everything else I've said. So, question as always to start, drop it in the comments. What stands out to you? What do you notice in hearing these familiar chapters offered in maybe a little more detail and perspective than you are used to? And then here's maybe some specific questions we can think about. What do you think grieves the heart of God in our world today? What does it say about our theology when we turn this into a children's story? Whew! And what ethical responsibilities flow from this story? How might it call us towards ecological justice today? There you go. Questions to think about. We'll be back next week with chapters 10 and 11. We got another little transitionary period with the tribes and nations, and then we're heading into Abraham, or Abram as he's known, in a couple of weeks. So for now, answer the questions, catch up on the first two videos if you missed them, and get ready for chapter 10 and 11 next week. I'll see you then.